The Beatles in
Help!
novelisation by Hine, based on a screenplay by Mark Behm and Charles Wood. Read by Jem Roberts. The roles came smoothly to a stop before the acting studio of Sam Ahab, sage and mentor to stars of stage, screen, television, and simple hopefulness. There are few actors, if any, so high on the scales of popularity and prestige as not to admit that their art can be sharpened by a brush-up session with Sam Ahab. As for fresh members of the profession, Ahab training is their entree both to casting office and to cocktail party. As much as any one person, Sam Ahab had a corner on the development of mimetic talent in the Western world. Naturally, it was to Sam Ahab that the boys turned for training when their skyrocketing career pushed them from pure musicianship into the dramatic arts. From the roles, they mounted the steps of the Ahab studio. The most modest of notices on the door simply proclaimed, "Sam Ahab, teacher of dramatic art." No more was needed for a name to conjure with on 3 continents. Said John to Paul, entering the sacred door, "I heard you last night doing Shakespeare in the toilet when you thought we were all in our pits." "It's no place, is it?" Paul admitted. "You'll believe me, Sam," Ringo began a plea as he caught sight of his mentor, a commanding, although not tall figure in blue jeans and sweatshirt, standing on the bare stage-like floor of the studio with a handsomely busty young woman costumed as Lady Macbeth. But Sam had already headed directly for John. "Now, John, baby!" Sam said, lopping a tutorial arm over John's shoulder. "I can talk to you, Sam," Ringo interrupted. Sam frowned. In his studio he reigned as absolute Tsar. There was no court of appeal to his decisions, and here was Ringo, a nice enough chap, a Beatle to be sure, but a tyro as an actor, actually interrupting.
Would I be making a tiny ricket if I asked you to lope?
Sam said in a voice of steel. "Hey up, Sam!" George tried to put all at their ease, unsuccessfully.
"Is it in your manner to be loose and lope?"
Sam asked Ringo. "Because you're human," Ringo faltered. "Is it in your interest to come here?" Paul put in. The discussion, as not infrequently in Beatle colloquies, seemed to skip several frames of reference and break through to the stratosphere.
"For a lad of your connivance, fitted as you are," Sam Ahab went on reasonably, "you should find the loping a little doddle. Good."
"You believe me, don't you, Sam?" Ringo remained rooted in his original premise. "I'm here," Paul said, "because they expect great things from me in my next film. It has been promised." "I know you won't believe me, Sam." Ringo kept to his plea.
"Do we start right off acting now?" George wondered. "Give me the wire for off, John, 'cause I got my earplugs in."
"But it is straight up," Ringo said. "I tell you." He was lost and ignored.
"Acting?"
Sam Ahab said in a stentorian tone. "Now?" John asked. "Lope?"
"Acting?"
The master lowered his voice, but kept its cutting edge.
"In my school, we don't act. In my school, we transcend."
"I'm the only one who's worthy of the medium, you know," Paul admitted. "These others, they're just clowns." Lady Macbeth, without entering into the disjointed conversation, had moved into the circle of Sam and the boys, somewhat magnetized by Paul. She wriggled winsomely and was now less purely Lady Macbeth than a combination of Juliet and Ophelia. "I know I can talk to you, Sam," Ringo bored in, encouraged by the general easing of the atmosphere.
"Chat!" Sam said. "Chat is your god. Will you cease the flaming rabbit?"
"That over there, Sam." John gestured to the other side of the stage.
"Time enough for chat when you're old."
Sam warmed to a philosophical diversion.
"Like me, older and hard-pressed."
"That bird with the lofty carriage," John said, pointing a discreet finger at the costumed Lady Macbeth, whose wriggles were now quite obvious.
"Get away from Lady Macbeth," Sam said. "Have you no pity?"
"I was rudely awakened this morning with a fishing rod, Sam." Ringo managed to start his own weird chronicle. "Is she transcending?" John asked, still fixed on the busty actress. Lady Macbeth was smiling openly now. Both smile and décolletage beamed directly at Paul. Sam dashed furiously across the room to stand between them.
Is she eckers like transcending? He said. She's acting, and a right let of old pony it is too. I've been trying to transcend this one for weeks.
I knew you'd disbelieve me, Sam, Ringo muttered hopelessly. Nobody, neither buddies nor mentors, were ever going to hear out and accept his tale of disguised sandwiches and nocturnal fishing rods. A lad might as well go home and douse his head for good in the swirling Mersey.
Come on, George said impatiently. Are we starting? It's costing me a little bundle, this tuition.
Come on, Paul, John chimed in. I'd like to see Paul do it. Makes the rest of you look dead rough, he does, you know. He has the gift. We're expecting great things from him. All four Beatles arranged themselves on the stage area as Sam, transformed into his educational self, shouted, "Transcend!" to all and sundry. Ringo began.
Now is the winter of our discontent, he intoned, made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house into the deep bosom of the ocean buried.
There was an undeniable transcendence, for though the body was the body of Ringo, the voice that emerged in rich, pear-shaped tones was a precise duplicate of Sir Laurence Olivier's. John took up the exercise. "How all occasions do inform against me," he recited, "and spur my dull revenge. What is a man, if his chief good and market of his time—" He too had achieved a breakthrough, for the tones that billowed from beneath his beetled thatch were indistinguishable from the best LP of Sir John Gielgud. Paul next. "My gentle Puck, come hither," he said. "Thou rememberest, since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back." And from Paul's throat came the exact intonations of Richard Burton. In response to a signal from Sam, George took his turn.
"Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend," he spoke, "the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act."
Alas, it was pure George Harrison that spoke the noble lines. The contrast with Old Vic and Liverpudlian was startling, to say the very least. From Ringo's first speech, music had begun to curl from the backstage fireplace like incensed wood smoke. It had begun as a fairly simple tune, but as it continued it took on a hypnotic and almost threatening quality. The Beatles, save for George, who remained caught up in his own dramatic rapture, Sam and Lady Macbeth gradually succumbed to the spell of the Oriental rhythm. Lady Macbeth, nearest the fireplace, was the first to go into a gliding dance of her own. Soon she was joined by Ringo and Paul. Sam and John were caught up too, all five of them, even as George said his piece, were swaying and tripping to the exotic melody. "Aha!" Clang said happily, crawling into the room over the harmonic half, closely followed by Buta and Ahme. George alone, protected by his earplugs, gaped in astonishment at the interlopers. The others were too busy, too fully captured by their dance. "The ring!" Clang cried. "This," Ahmed directed him, taking the dancing Ringo by his wrist and leading him past the startled, wide-eyed George. "Dance!" Clang suggested to the baffled George.
"You what?"
George asked. He was aware of all the others dancing, of Ringo being led away by a strange girl, of the intrusion of Clang and Buta. None of it seemed to fit together, but it might very well be part of Sam Ahab's program of transcendence. One never knew in an acting school. "I what?" Clang countered with silky dignity. "Dance!" On the edge of a table at the end of the room, Buta had set up a portable screw-on vice. Other lethal equipment was spread about, ready to hand. Ahmed led Ringo to the table, Clang following close. George watched like a man mesmerised into watching a television programme he'd never planned to look at. At the table, as the others danced obliviously, Ahmed placed Ringo's finger in the vice. She and Buta squirted oil all around the sacred ring, and they spun the vice as tight as possible, and then both pulled at Ringo. Nothing happened. Clang watched with folded arms and a scowl. "Prepare the theatre then," he said. "You mean?" Ahmed asked, holding a hand to her mouth in shock. "I mean," Clang said in tones that brooked no disagreement. "You mean?" George asked reasonably. He joined the group, where else was a non-dancer to go, and felt he should participate socially in whatever was going on. "We mean," Clang said, Buta uncovered an array of instruments ranging from tiny scalpels and eyebrow tweezers to a giant cleaver. Clang hefted the meat cleaver, nodding approvingly at its wicked balance as Hine took a magic marking pencil and circled Ringo's wrist. Clang moved closer with the cleaver as Buta held Ringo's arm to the table. "That could go septic," George cried in alarm. Friendly sociability could be carried too far, and he charged into the sacrificial quartet at the table. Clang swung at George with the cleaver and had a near miss. In disgust, he threw the cleaver bodily, missing George again but almost severing the top of Buta's finger. It soared past the table, past Ringo's arm, and embedded itself in a mirror. In the confusion, the oriental music came to an abrupt stop. The thug technicians outside, hearing the thunk of the cleaver, assumed the job was done. While the dancers were coming out of their daze, Clang, Hine and Buta fled through the front door. George pelted after them, but by the time he reached the door it had been slammed and held firm against him. Sam Ahab was angry and outraged. He stood in the centre of the floor, shaking his head in anger and humiliation. "That's it!" he said. "That's it! The last time I take on bleeding primitives! I'm very choked! You've stomped my studio, my shrine!" No, Sam, John protested, hazy himself, but sure of his innocence. "There was some strange music," Ringo said, waving his left arm to restore circulation. "A strange power," George said. "This strange feeling," Paul agreed, punching his head like a swimmer trying to drain water from his ears. "Doesn't half hurt," Ringo said, still shaking his arm. "What?" John asked. "That thing!" Sam explained, suddenly glimpsing the cleaver welded into his mirror like Excalibur in the magic stone. "They seemed," George ventured as sole eyewitness, "to want his ring." He pointed to Ringo. "Seemingly." "Me finger," Ringo said, examining the vice-swollen digit with concern. "It's all hurting." "That chopper!" Sam ruminated. Two and two were gradually being put together. "What strange power lies in Ringo's ring?" John questioned. "From what strange source did you acquire it, this strange ring, Ringo?" He looked almost severely at his fellow Beatle as if to blame him for the recent confusion. "This Eastern bird," Ringo explained. "You know, a fan. She sent it to me with a book." "Bags me too's on the book then," Paul cried, ever alert even in the moments of crisis. "You won't reckon it," Ringo said sadly. "It's all too far-fetched. Doesn't half hurt though, me hand." "They were going to chop it off, I'm afraid," George said. All eyes were suddenly focused on the cleaver. "That thing!" Sam said in tones of disgust and command. "Remove it!" Lady Macbeth, silent till now, suddenly took in the full signification of the hideous instrument. She cried in crescendo. Sam rushed to her side and comforted her with kindly caresses. John pulled out the cleaver from the mirror and handed it to Lady Macbeth. He felt the moment called for shock therapy. "Is this a chopper that you see before you?" he said. "Try it on your old man, it's sure to ring a bell."